Those were scenes from Pakistan Occupied Kashmir, from the city of Muzaffarabad. Clashes took place there recently, leaving at least 10 people dead and hundreds injured. The unrest began as a peaceful protest by locals. They were the third such protests in PoK in a little over 2 years. So, why do protests keep breaking out in PoK? And what are the underlying reasons? Let's decipher PoK's protest problem. Let's start by looking at the problem area, PoK, or as the locals call it, Azad Jammu and Kashmir. First thing to note, India and Pakistan have different definitions when it comes to Kashmir. India calls this entire area Pakistan Occupied Kashmir. As you can see, it includes some districts in the Jammu and Kashmir region and the territory of Gilgit-Baltistan. Pakistan, however, just considers this sliver of land Azad Jammu and Kashmir. Gilgit-Baltistan had been incorporated into Pakistan decades ago, despite originally being a part of the erstwhile princely state of Jammu and Kashmir during the British Raj. So, for the purposes of this video, we'll refer to this region as Pakistan Occupied Kashmir, and this part will be called Pakistan Occupied Gilgit-Baltistan. Islamabad considers Gilgit-Baltistan a part of Pakistan, but PoK is a bit of a grey zone. Officially, it is independent. Thus, the locals call it Azad. It has its own flag, its own Supreme Court, a legislative assembly, a president, and a prime minister. Not a chief minister like other Pakistani provinces. However, Islamabad ultimately controls the region's foreign policy, defense, and currency. And local governance, while officially autonomous, is overseen by two bodies: Pakistan's Ministry of Kashmir Affairs and the Azad Jammu and Kashmir Council, which is chaired by Pakistan's Prime Minister. So, for all practical intents and purposes, PoK has some autonomy, but not independence. Islamabad is still the one calling the shots, and that has been one of the key reasons for all the protests that have been springing up there. In 2022, Pakistan had an economic implosion. Debt was high, foreign reserves were low, floods had devastated the country. Pakistan's currency and overall economy were in free fall. Islamabad needed a bailout from the International Monetary Fund. To get that bailout, the country had to shore up its finances. Among other things, it was forced to remove subsidies on wheat, flour, and electricity. Over the next few years, this had a devastating impact on ordinary people. The removal of subsidies meant that inflation went through the roof. In May 2023, inflation hit a whopping 38%. Everyone was feeling the pinch, including the residents of PoK. That's when the first round of protests began. The demands were simple: a return of the wheat and flour subsidy and a reasonable rate for electricity. PoK produces a surplus of hydroelectric power thanks to the Mangla Dam. It then exports this electricity to Pakistan. So, PoK locals thought that they deserved to be charged a nominal rate for their own electricity. What started as demonstrations by local trader bodies expanded into something bigger. A group called the Jammu Kashmir Joint Awami Action Committee was formed. It is often abbreviated as the JAAC. This committee brought all the protesting factions across PoK together and placed their demands before the Pakistani and PoK governments. The JAAC organized a long march to Muzaffarabad last year to pile on the pressure. They were met with violence. 4 deaths and hundreds of injuries later, the Pakistani government agreed to the JAAC's terms, ending the protest last year. But 1 year on, the demonstrators returned. This time, they had a new list of demands. They released a 38-point charter. Among the demands were better healthcare, universal education, and the proper implementation of the wheat and electricity subsidies agreed to last year. There were also demands for an end to perks for government officials. Perks like government lodging, free electricity, and 2 government-supplied vehicles with drivers and unlimited free fuel.
हमारे जो गुंडे यहाँ पे बैठे हैं ना, सिर्फ इनके लिए ये है कि ये अपने VIPs जो प्रोटोकॉल है इसको ख़त्म करें, अपनी बिजली जो इनको फ्री में मिल रही है ये ख़त्म करें, आवाम के साथ रह के आवाम के साथ चलें। हमें सहूलत दें, हम उसको वोट दे के उनको खड़ा करते हैं तो वो हमारे खिलाफ खड़े हो जाते हैं। ऐसा तो नहीं होना चाहिए ना।
But the most controversial demand was an end to the 12 reserved seats for refugees from India-administered Kashmir. We mentioned that PoK has its own legislative assembly. The assembly has 53 seats. 5 of these seats are reserved for women. 1 for a member of the ulema, which means an Islamic religious scholar. 1 seat is reserved for a technocrat, and 1 for a PoK national residing abroad. So, with these 8 seats out of the picture, that leaves 45. Out of these 45 seats, 12 are reserved for refugees from Indian Kashmir. Pakistan has received multiple waves of refugees from Indian Kashmir over the decades. Many were settled all over mainland Pakistan, where their descendants continue to live. These refugees and their descendants have the privilege of electing 12 legislators in PoK, even though they don't live in the territory. This is considered symbolic because Kashmir is disputed territory and their participation signals hope for Kashmir's eventual reunification. But this system is easy to misuse. Since the refugee voters are scattered throughout Pakistan, it is difficult for local PoK parties and candidates to reach them. Thus, the seats are dominated by Pakistani mainland parties, who choose the candidates through a patronage network. Once elected, the refugee candidates siphon funds from PoK and the PoK legislature and spend them in mainland Pakistan, ostensibly for the benefit of the refugees. But this is despite the fact that the refugees are not contributing taxes to PoK. PoK locals see this as unfair because Pakistan had signed an agreement to take care of the refugees all the way back in 1949. Also, since the 12 refugee candidates are backed by mainland Pakistani parties, they are seen as a backdoor means for Islamabad to control PoK. This is why PoK locals have regularly been demonstrating against the existing system and why they are rallying behind the indigenous JAAC.
अवामी एक्शन कमेटी है, उसी की बात है, लोग उसी को पसंद करते हैं। पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज इररिलेवेंट हो गई हैं, वो चूँकि एजेंडा छोड़ चुकी थी, वो सहूलतकारी कर रही थी, वो हुक्मरान तबके की चापलूसी कर रही थी, खुशामद कर रही थी। अवाम की बात कोई नहीं कर रहा था, भागे थे सारे। सिर्फ अवामी एक्शन कमेटी और अवाम ने सब चीज़ें अपने हाथों में ली। अवाम ने दरअसल इनकलाब कर दिया था।
The JAAC took to the streets this year with their 38-point charter. They called for an indefinite shutdown across PoK in late September until their demands were met. Like last year, they were met with violence.
जो इस वक्त कंफर्म हो रही है 3 शहादतें देने के बावजूद
At least 10 people were killed in the resulting clashes, and this includes 7 protesters and 3 security personnel. It is only after this bloodshed that Islamabad sought to sit down with the JAAC. A high-level delegation was sent to Muzaffarabad and they held negotiations with the JAAC leadership. Despite Islamabad's reluctance to abolish the 12 refugee seats, finally the JAAC got their way.
हमारे जो मुतालबात थे वो मानेंगे, सब काम हमारे मामलात हल हो गए, अल्लाह का करम हो गया। हमारा जो भी नुकसान हुआ चलो हमें उसकी कोई फिक्र नहीं है, लेकिन चलो जो कौम के लिए जो काम हुआ इंशाअल्लाह हमें उस पर फ़ख्र है। हमें अपने कायद शौकत मीर पे फ़ख्र है। हम अभी भी उसके साथ हैं और आइंदा भी इंशाअल्लाह उसके साथ खड़े रहेंगे।
It has been 2 years of protests, ultimatums and violence in PoK. Islamabad has had to back down every time. But PoK's grievances keep cropping up, and the underlying cause seems to be the region's lack of autonomy, despite the independence it has on paper.